Thank you, Mr. Vice President. And thank you to all of you for coming. If someone up there can make the lights a little less oppressive, I'd appreciate that. It's a pleasure being here at Utah Valley University. This is my first time in Utah, and I've gotten to see how beautiful it is around here. I don't understand how you get any studying done. But it's really wonderful being with you here this morning. And I've been received very warmly here, I'm sure much better than I'll be received tomorrow at BYU. As you heard from the introduction that Jared read so nicely, I have two full-time jobs. One is following around Netanyahu and the other politicians in Israel, and the other is following around my two little children. Sometimes I feel it's pretty much the same job, but both jobs are very exciting. And it tends to be an exciting time in Israel, where we have never a dull moment. As you can see, living in the region that we do, you don't have to squint if you're in the back. The yellow countries are the ones that don't like my country very much. That's all. Where the blue, the little laser thing won't help because it's so small that the size of your fingernail pretty much up there. And that's all we have. One of the reasons that I'm here is because there's just so many misconceptions about my country. No, I don't need it. It's fine. You know, everybody sees in America. Too many people see Israel through a prism of two things: war and peace. Good book, right? You know, I actually read the book. As a journalism major at Northwestern, they make you take one literature class. And I went through the different classes. There was only one that made you read only one book. Had no idea how large a book it would be, but one book nonetheless. Okay, thank you. And so I did read the book, and I do recommend it if you've got about a year of free time. But Israel is so much more than that. Israel is a country that is striving to implement the prophecy of Isaiah, who said that we would be a light unto the nations. And it's not easy being a light unto the nations in a region like that. But Israel's doing what it can, whether it's by developing high-tech, become gradually in Israel a high-tech superpower, where Apple and Intel and all the top companies, high-tech companies around the world have their top research and development facilities outside America in Israel, where they've invented so many of the things that have improved your lives here in Utah every day, whether it's wireless internet or instant messaging or the Centrino and Pentium chips inside your laptop and your flash drive. And there have been calls for boycotting Israeli products. Good luck. People wouldn't do too well, I think, without those things and the medical technology saving lives around the world. We're a country that has brought in people from all over, a country of immigrants from more than 100 countries around the world. Just last week, we had our Miss Israel beauty pageant, and the woman who won is an immigrant to Israel from Ethiopia. She looks just like Beyonce, not like your typical Jewish girl from New Jersey. And, you know, she presents a very different face of Israel than people are expected to see. For me, it's very special to see how Israel, whenever there's any disaster around the world, Israel sends people to save lives, people that aren't Jewish, in Haiti, in East Asia, in Turkey. That's who we are. And that's, I think, a message that doesn't get out enough. I'm very proud to be visiting here from my home city, Jerusalem. It's such an honor for me to live in Jerusalem, in the place that You've read about so much in the Bible. That's a thriving city of Jews and Christians and Muslims together. For me to have the honor of raising a family in Jerusalem is something that I appreciate. My grandparents, who were Holocaust survivors, when they were in the concentration camps, could only dream that they would have a grandson who gets to raise children in Jerusalem, blonde, blue-eyed children in Jerusalem, the ultimate revenge against Hitler. And so I'm very thankful for having the life that I have. The very word for Jew in Hebrew, Yehudi, means someone who thanks God. And that's what we do. We thank God for every little thing that we have in life, not just for the big miracles, but for the little favors He does for us all day long. And so the very fact, though, that we continue to exist and thrive despite all the challenges facing us all around us shows that there are miracles that happen in Jerusalem day in and day out. And people who don't believe, there's too much evidence to the contrary. And so I just came back from covering an election in Israel that will have a big impact on the future of this region. In Israel, politics is our national sport, in part because we're not so good at other sports, and in part because it is so exciting. We had an election that was different than other people were expecting. Ahead of the election in Israel, I remember people were asking me a lot of questions that showed that they don't really understand politics in Israel. It's a little bit different than politics in America. Politics in America is divisive enough, but our system is a little bit more complicated. No one party has ever won a 61-vote majority out of the 120 members of parliament, so they have to form coalitions to run the country together. Got a little taste of covering American politics when I was here in November. I was at the victory party of the President of the United States in Chicago. Saw a lot of really happy people there, especially in the press box, it seemed. And I was talking to the other reporters there. I said to them, on the one hand, you have it a little bit easier than I do because you're covering only 2 political parties. And I'm from Chicago, where you even have only 1 political party. In Illinois, for a while, we even stopped having elections. We just auctioned things off to the highest bidder. In Israel, we have 34 political parties that I've got to be following day in and day out, of which 12 just got elected to the parliament. But on the other hand, I think I have it a little bit easier because our election in Israel lasted a total of 3 months. Your elections in America last 3 years. And it seems like it never really ends over here. And good luck with working on getting a candidate for another 4 years from now. Now, ahead of the election, I got asked a lot of questions by the foreign media. They were mostly asking me, why are Israelis moving to the right? Keep in mind that unlike America, where right and left mean a lot of different things, in Israel, right and left is defined purely on the Palestinian issue. That the people who are on the left are more interested in being generous to the Palestinians in any kind of final status agreement. The people on the right are less interested in being generous to the Palestinians in any kind of final status agreement. And so they were asking me, why are Israelis becoming more hawkish, moving over rightward? And I said to them, I don't think that's the case. I really think that on election day you're going to see that it's different than you're predicting. And in fact, it didn't end up that way. We ended up electing a parliament that's actually much more moderate. For the last 4 years, our parliament was 65 seats on the right and 55 on the left. And it ended up this time 61-59. Razor-thin majority, almost a tie. And I told the foreign press, I said, I would understand why Israelis would have moved to the right. we have had, over the last 7, 8 years, about 15,000 rockets fired from the Gaza Strip at Israel. That's the kind of thing that would make people question their security. We've had, over the last 4 years, Netanyahu going around the world begging the Palestinians to come to the negotiating table, and they've refused to come. That's the kind of thing that would make people doubt the ability to achieve peace anytime soon. And yet Israelis didn't go to the right, in part because there were some trends going on in Israeli society that I think the world didn't really take into account. 3 primary trends. Trend number 1, a socioeconomic trend. We in Israel are entitled to have elections on the economy too, just like you have here in America, even though we haven't in the past. In the past, people really did vote mostly on war and peace. In fact, people voted the opposite of what made sense for them economically. Unlike America, where politicians run under the slogan, it's the economy, stupid, right? In Israel, politicians had to be stupid to bring up the economy because people actually voted the opposite of what made sense for them economically. Poor people voted for the Likud party, Netanyahu's party, which is a capitalist party. It wants to cut benefits from the poor and help the rich. I'm oversimplifying. And rich people were voting for the Labor Party, which is a socialist party. It wants to cut benefits from the rich and help the poor. I'm not oversimplifying. That didn't make any sense, but they were voting on the Palestinian issue. In this election, people went to the polls, held their nose, and voted for a party that they disagree with on the Palestinian issue and that made more sense for their wallets. In part because a year and a half ago, we had 300,000 people protesting on the streets of Israel, socioeconomic protesters, protesting for social justice. Our economy in Israel is doing relatively well. We weathered the international economic crisis better than most Western countries did, and yet it is really hard for young people in Israel to get their start. The cost of living is way too high. The gap between rich and poor is the 3rd highest in the Western world, after Mexico and the country just to the north of Mexico. And so that affected how people voted, that people voted on the socioeconomic issue. Trend number 2, matters of religion and state. Israel is a country that has in it people from diverse backgrounds. We have in Israel Ashkenazi Jews from European countries, Sephardi Jews from North African and Middle Eastern countries, and besides the Jews, we have Christians and Bedouins and Muslims and Druze. And people that are ultra-Orthodox Jews and ultra-secular Jews, and everywhere in between. And the ultra-Orthodox have had a disproportionate amount of power. They are 9% of our population. That's all. 9% define themselves as ultra-Orthodox, 10% as modern Orthodox, religious Zionist. The difference is that the modern Orthodox serve in the army in their compulsory service, and they believe that they have to work for a living, whereas the ultra-Orthodox believe that they need to be learning Torah full-time, and they avoid the draft. 30% define themselves as secular, and 50% as traditional. And so the 91% that are not ultra-Orthodox have become increasingly resentful of the ultra-Orthodox for not serving, for not sending their children in harm's way the rest of the population was in a country with a compulsory draft. And that really boiled over in this election, where people voted on the issue of matters of religion and state. Trend number 3, frustration with politicians. You have that here in America too, right? You know, we've had too much political corruption, politicians who've let power go to their heads, and so the Israelis took that into account with how they voted. There's every year a very serious poll taken by the Israel Democracy Institute called the Democracy Index. And one of the 100 questions that they ask every year is, What professions do you respect the most and the least? Now, you would expect politicians to be the field respected the least, but it's actually second least. What field do you think is, what profession is respected even less than politicians? Lawyers, good guess. No, that's America. What? Used car salesman. No. But good guess anyway. Yep. We have our share of those lawyers. We have more lawyers per capita in Israel than any country in the world. More Jewish lawyers per capita than any state in the world other than New York. But the answer is actually journalists. The only field profession respected less than politicians are journalists. The ambassador is shaking his hand. Yep, it's a head. Yep. So as someone who spends most of his time with politicians and journalists as the political correspondent for the Jerusalem Post, I guess my friends are the scum of the earth. But that reflected in how people vote. The party that was the surprise success story of the election was a party called Yesh Atid, which is led by a charismatic former journalist, which had no politicians on the list. And so frustration with politicians was the third trend that affected how people vote. And so the election was on those things, not so much on war and peace. The day before the election, I got interviewed by the BBC. They asked me, what is this election about? And I told them the same three things I told you. Then they asked me, what is this election not about? And I said, it's not about what you care about in Britain. It's not about settlements. It's not about Palestinians. It's not about a peace process. And so they showed me saying that clip on the BBC, and then the anchor said, and that doesn't bode well for peace. Had she heard the rest of my interview, she would have heard me explain exactly why it does bode well for peace. The very fact that the election was not about the peace process resulted in Israelis electing a parliament that's much more moderate, and a cabinet that's much more moderate as well. Netanyahu is in the process of putting together his cabinet now. He has until the end of next week by law to do so. And so this is going to be a government that's going to be willing to go a long way in order to move the peace process with the Palestinians forward. The first party that Netanyahu brought into his government is a party called the Tzipi Livni Party, led by our former foreign minister. And she ran on a campaign of moving the peace process forward. That was her only issue. And she now is going to be our justice minister who is in charge of negotiating with the Palestinians. After they refused to come to the table for 4 years because they didn't think they could get anything out of Netanyahu, the world, I think, gave them the benefit of the doubt with that. Now, with Tzipi Livni in charge, they have no excuse to not come back to the negotiating table. And so there is now potential for negotiations to move forward for the first time in a long time. The last day you had real negotiations between Israel and the Palestinians was on August 30th, 2008. On August 30th, 2008, the President of the United States was still George Bush, and the Prime Minister of Israel was Ehud Olmert, and he gave the Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas quite an offer. He offered to give the Palestinians 100% of the West Bank with land swaps, 100%. He offered to take in thousands of Palestinian refugees, even though no Israeli government had ever before agreed to even allow in one, because there were a lot more Arabs, there were a lot more Jews who were expelled from Arab and Muslim countries as there were Arabs who fled the new Jewish state. And Ehud Olmert, as Prime Minister of Israel, offered to divide Jerusalem, our heart and soul, to have the Arab neighborhoods in Jerusalem become the capital of a Palestinian state. He offered to have the holy basin of the old city become internationalized under the control of 5 countries: the United States, the new Palestinian state, Israel, Jordan, and Saudi Arabia. That was the offer that the Prime Minister of Israel made to the Palestinians in August 2008. Had the Palestinians said yes, Olmert would have brought it the following month to the UN General Assembly, where it would have been approved by 190 countries. But the Palestinians did not say yes. The Palestinians said, that's right, nothing. They didn't say anything at all. They didn't come back to the table. We're still waiting for them to come back. And now there is potential for there to be a peace process again. 4 days after the deadline for Netanyahu to form his government, we're going to have a visitor come to Israel who's been awaited for a long time, the President of the United States, Barack Obama. He didn't come to Israel his first term in office, and so now he's coming, better late than never. And he is going to try again to move the peace process forward. Not immediately. He's coming now, first of all, in order to try to improve his ties with Israelis, because he needs to build their trust, which he lost over the last 4 years. Let's take you back. Let's see how far back we'll go. I started taking polls shortly after Obama took office 4 years ago about what Israelis think about him. And the first poll was back in May 2009. He did relatively well. And we asked Israelis, is the Obama administration going to be more pro-Israel, more pro-Palestinian, or neutral? The percentage saying that he would be more pro-Israel was 31%. The percentage saying he would be more pro-Palestinian was 14%. So he did all right, 31 to 14. Not quite as well as Bush, where the numbers were 88 to 2. But he did all right. That was in May. A couple things happened between May and the second poll we took in June. First of all, Obama came to the Middle East and gave a speech in Cairo. Bowed down a couple times in Saudi Arabia, but didn't come to Israel. And Israelis didn't like that so much. In his speech in Cairo, he sort of compared what the Palestinians had been through to the Holocaust. And that is the kind of thing that upsets Israelis. We don't compare anything to the Holocaust. And even though the Palestinians have suffered, it's because of their own leadership that's failed them time and time again, while Israel has constantly tried to help them. Now, another thing happened between May and June, which was that Netanyahu and Obama had their first meeting in the White House, where Obama revealed an obsession with settlements that would prevent there from being a peace process for 4 years. Took Netanyahu by surprise, demanding that Israel stop building in Jewish neighborhoods in Jerusalem, something no Israeli government would have ever agreed to do, which he should have known. And that made it a lot harder for there to be a peace process. There was a high-profile dispute there in the White House between Netanyahu and Obama, where Netanyahu said, Mr. President, if you succeed at preventing the nuclearization of Iran, the extremists in the region are defeated and the moderates empowered, and you can make peace in the Middle East. And Obama said, no, I see it the other way. When I make peace between Israel and the Palestinians, that will bring the Arab and Muslim world on board to prevent the nuclearization of Iran. Israelis heard this and they said, oy vey. He doesn't get it. We've been trying to make peace between Israel and the Palestinians now for many, many years. We can't wait to prevent a crazy man in Iran from getting the bomb. Arab leaders heard this, and they said whatever the Arabic equivalent is of oy vey, because they weren't telling Obama, help the Palestinians. I wish they were. They were telling Obama, cut off the head of the snake. Deal with Iran right now, because the Arab and Muslim countries are just as worried about Iran getting nuclear weapons as Israel is. And so that was a very high-profile dispute between Netanyahu and Obama and the White House. And so the numbers changed dramatically. The percentage of Israelis saying that Obama is pro-Palestinian went up from 14% to 50% in 3 weeks. The percentage saying that he's more pro-Israel went down from 31% to only 6%. And this made news all around the world that Israelis had lost their confidence in the President of the United States. Obama's advisors saw this poll, and they said, we can't allow this number to get any lower. And in fact, it did. August 2009, it fell to only 4%, which, if you think about it, is almost mathematically impossible. The poll had a margin of error of 4.5%. That meant that there were people who hadn't even been born yet who had a problem with the President of the United States. Now, the numbers then went up gradually, 10%, 12%. Then there was an effort by the Obama administration to reach out to Israelis, what was called a charm offensive, where Obama welcomed Netanyahu in the White House warmly after treating him not so good a couple times. And in that meeting in the White House, he said all the right things. Then he gave an interview to Israeli TV where he really tried to reach out to Israelis. He said that preventing the nuclearization of Iran was his #1 foreign policy priority, which is definitely what Israelis wanted to hear. He said he understood that historically in Israel there's an irony in which it's been proven over and over again that ironically it takes the left to make war and the right to make peace. Looking back historically, he's right. In Israel, when the right has gone to war, the left has protested against it, but when the left has gone to war, the people of Israel have united. When the left has tried to make peace, the right protested against it, and a prime minister of Israel was even assassinated. But when the right has made peace, it's stuck, and the people have united behind it. And so he said, out of all people, it takes somebody like Netanyahu to make peace in the Middle East, just like it took somebody like Richard Nixon to go to China. Obama said all the right things in that interview, except for one thing. He was asked by the interviewer, why don't Israelis like you? Which is a legitimate question. And his answer was, maybe it's because my name is Hussein. Bad answer. Israelis don't like to be told that they're racist. They're not. Israelis don't like to be told that they're shallow. Israelis had a problem with his policies. Israelis on the right, who don't want to give up any land, wouldn't have liked him anyway. Israelis on the left, who desperately believe that Israel needs to give up the West Bank and Gaza to create 2 states for 2 peoples for Israel's own good, so there will not be a majority of Arabs between the Mediterranean Sea and the Jordan River, and will continue to have a Jewish state. They were very disappointed with Obama because they look at what he's done over the last 4 years, and they blame him for there not being a peace process over the last 4 years, which there was the previous 16. And so what Obama is doing is he's coming to rebuild Israelis' trust in him. He's not going to be announcing a Middle East peace plan immediately. First, you've got to lay the foundation for that. I got interviewed in England before coming here by the foreign editors of all the British papers together, and they asked me, what should we take into account ahead of the Obama visit to Israel? And I said to them, prepare page 13, because he's not going to make headlines in Israel. If he makes headlines, then something has gone dreadfully wrong. He's coming just to improve ties with Israel. The headlines can come later after he builds that trust. And I think it is possible for Obama to regain the trust of Israelis and Palestinians. He upset them too over and over again, but they also upset him pretty bad over and over again. So this trip is really intended to improve ties. And there's no better way to make Israelis feel better about the President of the United States than him reassuring them that he will do everything possible to prevent Iran from getting a nuclear capability, which they're worried about, because Israelis followed the election campaign in the United States very closely. There was a foreign policy debate between Obama and Romney, remember that? And after that debate, the papers the following day talked about how they kept on mentioning Israel. It's great, we felt loved, but that Obama and Romney sounded the same. That was what the papers in America said. Whereas the papers in Israel said Obama and Romney present opposite agendas on Iran. Because they heard Obama say in the debate, I will prevent Iran from getting a nuclear weapon. And they heard Romney say, I will prevent Iran from getting a nuclear capability. What's the difference between that? It's not just a one word. It's about 2 years. And so the President of the United States was basically saying, I'm going to take my time. And Romney was saying, I'm going to do everything possible to keep the world safe immediately. And I think that had Americans maybe seen the nuances better, the way that we did in Israel, maybe the vote would have been different, maybe in a state or two, you never know. But it is what it is. And so we appreciate in Israel what your Mormon candidate tried. Maybe you'll get another candidate someday in the future. But on Iran, the president needs to reassure Israelis that he will prevent Iran from getting a nuclear capability because we're very worried. And Netanyahu went to the United Nations in September, and he said that the world needs to unite to prevent the nuclearization of Iran. He even drew a picture all about it. And he set a deadline, what he called spring, summer. And it's no wonder that Obama is coming to Israel on the first day of spring, because he wants to make sure that Israel and America are on the same page. We in Israel interpreted Netanyahu's speech a little bit different. When we hear spring, summer, we think of the only month that's in both spring and summer, which is June. And June happens to be the month where the Iranians have elections. You remember what happened the last time they had elections in Iran? It was in July 2009. The people took to the streets because it wasn't allowed to be democratic. And did the protesters on the street get help by the leading nations of the world? No. The world leaders let them down. And so now there's an election in Iran again. It won't be any more democratic than the last one was. Chances are the people will take to the streets again. The Iranian regime knows that they will. That's why they sent their army to Russia to get training in how to quash protests. But the people will come to the streets. Hopefully this time the world leaders won't let them down. The world leaders will help them. And between now and then, the sanctions are going to be intensifying on Iran to come to a head in June. And perhaps by then, the regime will realize that the people are so frustrated that they either will have to give up their nuclear program or lose power. Keep in mind, the regime in Iran, the sanctions, they're hitting them pretty hard. The Iranian regime is losing from lost oil and gas revenue $140 million every single day. They lost $40 billion in 2012. If you've got some business students here, if you lose $40 billion, chances are you will be fired. And so there is renewed hope to prevent the nuclearization of Iran by non-military means. Now, Netanyahu gave a speech yesterday to AIPAC, to the American-Israel Public Affairs Committee in Washington via satellite from Jerusalem, where he said the sanctions are helpful, but they can't work on their own. They have to be combined with a credible military threat. That, ironically, the way to avoid military action sometimes is to have a military threat. And the only time Iran ever stopped their nuclear program was back in 2003 when the United States invaded Iraq. And Iran thought, well, we must be next. And so there is hope that that can work. And yesterday was the first day of work of your new American Secretary of Defense, Mr. Hagel. And his first meeting at the beginning of the day was with Ehud Barak, our Minister of Defense from Israel. Which shows how close the two countries are and shows how urgent it was for Israel to meet with your Secretary of Defense and make sure he carries on the policies of his predecessor. Barak has been in Washington over and over again over the last 2 months to make sure that all the oral understandings he had reached with Leon Panetta will continue on with the new administration in the Pentagon. And so there is new hope that it can work. But, and we know that preventing the nuclearization of Iran is also the key to the success of what at the beginning optimistically was called the Arab Spring. This region doesn't look too spring-like, I think. Bashar Assad. Please don't come down. You can see Syria there on the map, and it's absolutely terrible that Bashar Assad has murdered 50,000 of his own people, and the world hasn't lifted a finger to stop it. That makes us in Israel very worried that countries without oil don't get help, and it's a real problem. But you would expect me to be happy, right? These are our enemies. Both the Bashar Assad and the rebels don't like Israel very much. I know you have international relations classes here, and they'll probably teach you concepts there like the enemy of your enemy is your friend, and the devil you know better than the devil that you don't know. Neither of those things work in the Middle East. The enemy of your enemy is your enemy, and the devil that you know and the devil that you don't know, both devils. So Bashar Assad and the rebels, neither of them are Zionists, but we in Israel are crying over what's happening to the people there. That's the way we are. We've got a Passover Seder coming up in another 2.5 weeks. And I don't know how much you learn about Judaism here at Utah Valley University, but we, on our Passover Seder, we have 4 cups of wine, except for 10 drops that we dip our finger into the cup and take out of the cup. Why? Because there were 10 plagues that hit the Egyptians pretty hard, and we're sad about that. Why are we sad about that? These are the people who enslaved the Jewish people. They whipped us, and they were downright mean. Why are we upset that they got hurt by commandments, by plagues given by God? We should be downright happy, but we're not. We feel the pain of our enemies. That's the way we are as Jewish people. And so in Syria, seeing what's going on is absolutely tragic, and there have been Syrians who recently fled to Israel out of all places for medical care, and we have helped them out. That's who we are. Just like our hospitals in the south were full of patients from Gaza who we were treating. And there have been suicide bombers in Israel who've blown themselves up in pizza parlors and playgrounds, and we treat them alongside their victims. Jewish and Arab doctors treating Jewish and Arab victims. That's the way we are in Israel. And so we want the people of the region to have a brighter day ahead. When the whole Arab Spring began, I was watching from my office in the Knesset, Israel's parliament building, the heart of Israeli democracy, thinking, great, other countries in the region are going to have what we have. We in Israel are sick and tired of being the only stable democracy in the Middle East. We want other countries in the region to have that too. We want them to have a brighter day. We want them to have our technology, our economy. Unfortunately, it hasn't gone in that direction yet, but there are signs that things are going to get better. Then in Egypt, they've realized that going in the direction of Islamic fundamentalism and radicalism wasn't the right way to go. And that's sending a message to the rest of the Arab and Muslim world that being allies of the West is really the way to go. That's what's really helping the Egyptians. They are getting, the reason why Egypt has kept its peace agreement with Israel, even though they don't like us very much, is because they have billions in American aid predicated on keeping the peace agreement with Israel. If you give me a few $1 billion, I'll love anybody you want me to love. And so the Egyptians are keeping the peace agreement not out of a love of the Jewish people, but out of a love of American money. And so it is good, though, from Israel's standpoint, that the peace agreement is continuing, and Egypt is even making sure that their allies in the Muslim Brotherhood, Hamas in Gaza, have stopped firing rockets at us finally. We are appreciative of that. And one thing that also we can say about this region is that the world understands what Israel's up against more than they ever have before. They realize how dangerous the region is. And yet, even though we don't know whether the region is going to go in the right direction or the wrong one, and even though there is a potential existential threat from Iran, and even though we don't know where our final border is going to be, We in Israel are not waiting for those things to be dealt with. We had an election that proves that. We had an election where people didn't vote on war or peace, where people voted on who we are in Israel as a Jewish and democratic state, where people voted on the economy, about how to make it continue to thrive, but in a sensitive kind of way, where people voted on what it means to be a Jewish state and a democratic state together to make that beautiful. We in Israel showed that we can deal with normal issues the way other countries do, and not have to be focused on what the world thinks of us. There's a word in Hebrew that I learned recently called hitnormalnu, which means we are becoming more normal as a country. That at the age of 65, we're finally maturing. We're finally growing up as a country. And so I hope and pray that things in Israel are going to get better, that things for our Palestinian neighbors and all our neighbors in the region are going to get better. And I hope and I pray that things will also get better here in America. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Gil. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks for coming out. Let's give another round of applause for Gil. Thank you.